Hey everyone. It seems like from chat, quite a few of you are still holding Leap Therapeutics, LPTX. You can see here the chart is looking pretty ugly, unfortunately down from highs of around 4 to 130 currently. Market cap is misleading. It says 115 million, but keep in mind all the warrants and such. So I believe that's somewhere around 160 or 170 million shares outstanding last time I checked. Fully diluted, taking all the warrants into account. So that would put it at around $200 million market cap, give or take. I know they have an R&D day coming up, something like 4 days, 5 days. Cash and equivalents in Q1 was 103 million compared to a net loss of 10 million. You would assume, oh, they have plenty of cash, but they have ambitions of, you'll see in the R&D day, quite a few indications they want to move into, like colorectal cancer and endometrial, I imagine. So kudos to management for being disciplined with cash usage at a time when many small cap bios are not. But at the same time, they have a lot they want to do, including moving into pivotal study for gastric. The prostate study's looking pretty good so far, so I imagine at some point it'll move from investigative sponsored to a company sponsored trial as well. So, you need cash to pay these things. I like the quote I listened to recently. I think it was from a conference call where the executive said drug development is 40% dose and PK, 10% 10% the target, and 50% execution. So, part of execution is having the cash to develop. And so far, it seems like Leap management is making rational decisions. Going very briefly through the slides, again, this is just a few ramblings on the name. Gastric cancer is the main lead indication. Endometrial, the paclitaxel combination in the past has produced some promising data. The lung cancer study itself was from a number of years ago, but they did have a monotherapy CR, complete response, as I recall. So, monotherapy activity is always a good sign. Prostate cancer is the investigator-sponsored trial underway currently. A good and a bad thing is they've partnered with Beijing, so it helps that to have some of the spend offset. But they did kind of partner for peanuts as far as price. A $10 million option exercise fee could be due sometime in the next few quarters if Beijing opts in. From there, 132 million milestones, royalties just in the single to mid-teen double digits. So as you can see, gastric cancer here in China, the incidence, new cases per year also are far higher than other regions. So it is kind of unfortunate that the economics have been given up for that, but you can understand, small cap companies have to do what they have to do to survive. Not a main part of the story, but, Novartis, I believe it was, who partnered with Beijing's PD1 for rest of world rights. So in a day where the FDA is being much more strict on, Me Too drugs coming to market, they need a novel way to come to market. And so a logical one would be if Leap Therapeutics is the sole player in the DKK-1 target, more on that in a moment, then, as we're at a time where we're seeing desperate small cap biotech names scooped up on the cheap, you wake up to 100 or 200% buyout. Leap is certainly such a name that could happen. So the role of DKK-1 in cancer, you can see that it enhances MDSCs, suppresses NK cells, basically contributes to an environment that is less responsive to immunotherapy, upregulates FR2, which increases formation of tumor blood vessels, angiogenesis otherwise known as, cell proliferation. Moving on to the next part, if you look at a lot of the literature, I won't go into it again, this is a short video, but DKK-1 high levels are associated with poor survival. So in all these cancers, you can see quite a difference between, here as an example with gastric, the difference between DKK-1 high patients, high expressors, and low. The low expressors are far better off. The outcomes are better for the low versus the high. While I'm thinking about it, when we talk about the gastric cancer data later, what I like about this target is it's poor prognosis. So there's many companies that can, they'll select a target to pursue a biomarker enriched strategy where they know that high expressors will do better. But it's one thing just to find that small segment of patients that respond better to your treatment, and another is flipping the script entirely, taking these patients who are the worst off and turning them into the best off patients. And that's something you're going to see coming up. H-score cutoff on scale 0 to 300. It's interesting that the DKK-1 high patients need just an H-score of 35. So it's encouraging that a larger segment of patient population in that sense, as we look at gastric ahead, qualify as high, you'll see. So again, this would seem to be the ideal PD1 partner. Anti-PD1 combination, that's DKN-01 in the name of the drug, stimulates activity of NK cells, induces a pro-inflammatory tumor microenvironment, or TME as we call it, upregulates PD-L1, the target for PD-1 antibodies, activates CD8s, etc. So again, you'll see in the data coming up that there's also patients who are DKK-1 low who respond well to the treatment as well. So it's interesting that this target is, there's benefit across the entire patient population as opposed to just the high expressors. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So quickly into the latest gastric data, you can see a 63% partial response rate, 4% complete response. The DKK-1 high patients, 90% response rate, quite impressive, 44% in DKK-1 low. So again, the blue is the low, and you can see this complete response in a patient who started out as a PR and gradually deepened. That's encouraging. Again, this isn't one that you would expect to do well. And so you can see other blue bars benefiting from treatment as well. And then, of course, the greens stick out, high expressors. I'll skip ahead to the safety profile. It doesn't seem out of line. It seems quite manageable if you think about it. The part that did stick out to me and to many others was the pulmonary embolism, grade 5, which otherwise means patient death. And there's been a couple of those. But keep in mind, pulmonary embolism, it's something like 3%, 3 to 4% range, I believe the literature says, for gastric cancer, the incidence. So it could definitely be due to the underlying condition, underlying cancer, rather. And many of these patients are far worse off than comparator studies, as we'll see later on. So a bright spot was events leading to dose reduction, only 4%. Discontinuation rate of 12%. That's feasible. Drug-related adverse events, DKN-01 related, 56%, versus tislelizumab, which is the PD1 from Beijing, is higher, and these other chemo regimens. So when you think about the progression-free survival seen for the data, I believe it was something like 10.9 months. I'll check on that the next slide. But you can see here the comparator studies, 7.7, 7.7, 6.11, 6.9. And the response rate here is significantly lower as well. And again, won't go into it, but these studies in the past with nivolumab and pembrolizumab as an example, they all had a significantly higher number of patients who were PD-L1 high, the ones who you would expect to respond to checkpoint, versus the Leap Therapeutics study had a significantly lower portion of PD-L1 high patients. Again, that's 68% overall response rate versus 47%, 50%, 46, 48 in a much more favorable patient population. So again, that reminds me kind of the Agenus data we were looking at in the last video, where you have to look at patient baseline characteristics. It's not apples to apples. Interestingly, even this DKK-1 low patient population, the ones who you would not expect to do as well, 56% ORR, is still higher than what you would see here, again, with a more favorable patient population. And then the fun part here is 90% response rate, 11.9 month PFS in DKK-1 high. Many people would say, oh, well, that's the biomarker enriched population, so of course that makes sense. But again, these are the patients who are far worse off. Remember, those who have this biomarker are the ones who are significantly shorter overall survival. So the fact that you're flipping the script and taking patients who are worse off and making them the best off, reminds me of, something like HER2. So it's quite a big deal as long as the safety profile holds up. That's the big caveat with those pulmonary embolism events. While I'm thinking about it, devil's advocate, you could say, well, these are patients who probably would respond well to PD-1. But again, the orange is patients with a PD-L1 CPS of less than 5. So these are ones with very low expression. And you can see that they've done quite well. So again, we can chalk that up to the drug itself in DKK-1 high and not or DKK-1 low, as we've seen some benefit in them too, and not just due to PD-L1 expression. Of course, with the purple, we do see some with higher expressors who do well as well. But again, focusing on the orange, I think that's quite promising. You can tell that you can't chalk this up just to patients being PD-L1 expressors. And again, the CPS scores, you don't even have any high CPS scores here. I mean, they go up to 20 for the PD-L1. And again, these are the DKK1 expressors, how they're lined up on the chart. And you can see the majority in the 0 to 100 range, a lot of clustering here in the 30, 40, 50. Very little above that. So again, encouraging that the majority of these patients are benefiting from treatment, as you can see, and you can't chalk that up to PD-L1 expression. The prior endometrial study, you can see the green are the DKK1 high. That was a combination trial, I believe. Well, some combo and some with paclitaxel and some monotherapy, but again, you can see the green bars being the responders. But that's an early signal that would need to be, replicated in a much larger trial. Just like we talked about with the lung cancer monotherapy complete response, there's a monotherapy complete response with endometrial cancer as well. The patient continued multiple years after, I believe, maybe even still continues. So encouraging to see. The recent prostate data, monotherapy, perhaps disappointing. We don't see much there. But in the combination with docetaxel, is much better than you would expect. Again, these are the metastatic castration-resistant setting, and patients do need to be biomarker high for DKK1 either in plasma or biopsy. You can see the AVPC, I believe, stands for aggressive variant of prostate carcinoma. So these are patients that you would not expect to respond, and they don't respond well to androgen receptor therapies. So here you can see all the combination patients with docetaxel, they do respond, whether unconfirmed or confirmed. Again, that is another pet peeve, is when companies call it 100% response rate or 50% or whatever, but they include the unconfirmed responders who, of course, a quarter or two later, they'll sweep it under the rug and say this unconfirmed response, essentially was never confirmed, so it really didn't count. But even if we take away the two unconfirmed responses, that's still 3 out of 5. So 60% OR compared to the Keynote 365 study for pembrolizumab with docetaxel, and that was a 23% confirmed over ORR by RECIST. So again, caveat for the low number of patients here so far, but it looks quite interesting. And they let us know that the 6th patient had a PSA 50 response after the data cut off. So they are going to continue enrolling. I think the trial said something like 90 patients total, though I don't know the exact amount. But again, what's nice is this is an investigator-sponsored study, so the company doesn't have to put the resources into it. They're just providing the drug. But that always comes with a cost. Investigator-sponsored studies, the good news is a company doesn't have to put out the cash. But the bad news is these can take a lot longer than if a company were running them more efficiently. That makes me think of Xenon Pharmaceuticals with their MDD, major depressive disorder study, where they had an investigator-sponsored study or investigator-initiated that's already started in the company a couple quarters ago, and the company is just starting its own company-sponsored trial, and management is guiding for the company-sponsored trial to be finished before the investigator study. So again, it's just a reminder that, as with all things, there's a balance, and the good news here is is lower cash spend on this, but the bad news is it takes longer to recruit. Again, you guys, I harp on this too many times, but that's how I am. When I taught English, language and literature at a university, I did the same thing. And for myself as a student too, I learned by repetition, sometimes through this thick skull. You have to say things 5 or 6 times for me to get it. So my monotherapy activity rule, you can see here, the combo starts out doing well, and then the patient is discontinued on the docetaxel due to toxicity, and just put on DKN-01 monotherapy, and it continues. The effect deepens and continued tumor regression. So that's what we want to see. We know that this drug is doing something. And again, this is like a 4th or 5th line patient, I think. So quite a few prior lines of therapy. Not one you would expect to do well. DKK1 H-score of 0, interestingly enough. So looking at my prior notes, I just wanted to see if there's anything I missed for you all. Poor prognostic marker. Keep in mind, as we stated prior, these patients who have DKK1 high expression typically discontinue treatment much faster compared to low expressors. So that makes the results more impressive. In the distinguished study in gastric cancer, it was encouraging to see a DKK1 high score of 57% in frontline patients. So again, these were worse off. Not only were many of them PD-L1 low, but they were also DKK1 high, so doubly worse off than these comparator trials. So again, that's why it's not apples to apples. Underline that point, 3/4 of patients had a CPS score of less than 5. So we know it's not the PD1 necessarily that's contributing to this effect. There were some remarks on the second line opportunity, as 1/3 of these patients are DKK1 high, but it's quite aggressive there, and they had the problem of patients' disease progressing before they could even get them enrolled on the study. So it makes a lot more sense to focus on the frontline opportunity, which is the broadest for the company and where they can make the most impact on these patients. While management hasn't said anything, colorectal cancer is probably one of the likely indications they move into. Has a high degree of Wnt activation, high DKK1 in these advanced patients. Usually it's 5-FU is the frontline regimen. Lower activity for PD1 antibodies outside of the MSI high patients. MSI high is 15% in the frontline, and then later on that number goes down. So that would be an interesting indication for them to move into. Kind of going into my prior point, you can't really compare to those other studies like Checkmate 649 with the PD1 inhibitors, because nearly 2/3 of those patients, that's higher than I thought, were high PD-L1 expression. So they're known to have better outcomes, but that's not necessarily what the real world looks like. The distinguished trial population for Leap Therapeutics had 75% of patients with low PD-L1 expression. So that's more what you would see in the real world. To underscore that point, only 2 patients in the distinguished study, 2 patients had a CPS score of greater than 10. So again, it just makes the data more exciting or promising, caveat for the low number of patients, but still the fact that these are the worst off and they're doing so well relative to the benchmarks in studies where the patients are far better off. So to finish my ramblings real fast, where could we go from here? You're at a share price of 130 and you have data coming up, what was it, in the fall? If I'm not mistaken, ESMO is in September. So you definitely, we're in July now, so July, August, between now and August, you could see that run up. Lately, as we're seeing some small cap names rebound. So this entry point here is not bad. It's not a bad idea for those of you who like more speculative names. You could easily see that run up nicely into the results. Again, when you're thinking of the overall survival, remember the progression-free survival first we saw. 10.7 months in the overall population is far better than these other studies where the patients are far better off. So when we look at overall survival of 13, 14, at the lower end is 12, we would expect significantly better for this study, where again, the patient population is much worse prognosis, low PD-L1 and high DKK1. So I'm looking forward to the data from a scientific, intellectual point of view. I don't have a position in the company right now, just because, as you guys know, I've been focusing on platform technology names, names in a better financial position, maybe cash runways into 2024, so they'll be ready for if things kind of get colder in the future again, in terms of funding situation and such. But against Leap Therapeutics, I have nothing. I think it's a good speculative idea. You have the data coming up near term. You have the R&D day. We'll see when or if, I imagine when, Beijing decides to opt in. You always have that call option if Novartis just decides to scoop them up for going into a frontline study. So I was wrong about that prostate trial the investigator sponsored. It is 72 participants is the total they're looking to enroll. And the primary completion date is June of 2023. So who knows, perhaps by ASCO or ESMO, we'll have the updated data set for there. And from there, the company will likely move forward into a company-sponsored study in mid or late stage, depending on how the data looks. They also have an interesting dilemma when they decide to move, whether in phase 2 or 3 for this combo in gastric. On the one hand, you want the fastest path to market, and the most efficient path could be just in these DKK1 high patients. But again, the broader opportunity would be in all the patients, because even the DKK1 low, we saw that partial response that turned into a complete response, and that response rate and PFS are better than those other trials on the whole, including the entire patient population, not accounting just for biomarker high. So if you're the company, on the one hand, you could choose this more efficient path of DKK1 high patients, but on the other hand, the broader opportunity is going after, including the DKK1 low. One last thought on market opportunity. Let me see if I get this right. It's in this study, it was 75% of the patients were PD1 low expressors. So these are the patients. That's more reflective of the real world. And on top of that, key opinion leaders state that CPS score of less than 5, they won't even look at using a checkpoint inhibitor. So the opportunity here is quite large. But on the converse side, this can be challenging for a company of this size to take forward. So I'm horrible at predicting buyouts, but if you do have something with high strategic value to big pharma, that's always nice to include as a selection criteria for all of your holdings. You want something that is an attractive asset or a platform technology to big pharmaceutical companies. It increases your ways to win. Personally, I think we only have a couple or more buyouts each year in the portfolio, but it's always nice to wake up to one of those. So you do want to increase your probability of that happening. So we do have that high strategic value here. We do have a near-term catalyst coming up in September. So that's, again, why I think you'll see the chart could curl up into those results. Next year, we have the prostate data. As for my personal selection criteria, I definitely could miss out on a buyout here or the run up and potentially the stock going higher on the overall survival results. But I tend to stick to situations where there's more going on, more irons in the fire, more assets in the clinic. In this case, it's a single drug story, so perhaps I'll revisit later on when we have the gastric study in a pivotal trial and those results are closer. The prostate has the higher number of patients read out, the update coming out when they can give us guidance on that next year. It'd be really interesting to see if they move into this endometrial cancer indication. The lung cancer, I don't think that's high on their priority list, but I do think the colorectal is, from what the company has stated, talking with the key opinion leaders. The problem is they have quite a few hypotheses, indications they want to pursue, and it's just a matter of each person jockeying for which indication is the higher probability of success, the higher unmet need, the best opportunity for a company of this size. So that will be interesting to look forward to. So those are just my thoughts here. Some quick rambling on this name, and look forward to what you guys think about it.